Hey, my algebra students, it is Wednesday. Hope you're having a great week. This is the last major lesson that we're going to go over. We have some stuff next week to kind of tie things up. But this is the third method for solving quadratic formulas. I forgot there's actually a fifth method, so we're not going to cover two of them. One is graphing and one is completing the squares. Completing the squares and graphing are probably the least two that you're going to use, but hopefully next year when they catch you up, they'll go over this for you. This lesson is simply knowing a formula, plugging the numbers in the right spot, and then pretty much doing a little bit of computation. So it looks scary and it looks hard, but it really isn't. Okay? As long as you're good at plugging and chugging. So, I'm going to skip that. So if you have a quadratic or a nice looking equation that looks like this, where you have ax squared plus bx plus c, and you set it equal to 0, you can use something that's called the quadratic formula for any equation. Okay? As long as you have an x squared in there, where a is not equal to 0, you can use this for any equation. So the quadratic formula, and what I would do, because you really should have this memorized in the back of your head. I haven't forgotten it since 9th grade, okay? And you all know how old I am. I'm not going to say it on this video, but you all know how old I am. I have this thing memorized in my head, okay? So you're going to want to say it every time you write it out, maybe say it a couple times more, so you kind of know what it is, all right? So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is over 2a. Okay? I know. Yeah, easy peasy. So this is going to be just like when you're finding slope, just like when you're finding the y-intercept, things like that. You need to label your stuff, plug and chug, and then you're good to go. The biggest thing is finding keeping track of your negatives and stuff and all your signs. So neatness is going to matter, and having attention to detail is going to matter when you're doing this. Okay, we're going to solve using the quadratic formula. We have a quadratic equation and it's set equal to 0, so we don't have to do any manipulating. We can identify a, b, and c. So my a is 6, my b is 5, and my c is negative 4. Notice how we take that minus sign and make it a negative. Okay, you got to get the signs that are in front of it. Okay, now we're going to plug and chug. Always write the formula out. Okay, so we're going to take negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 4. By the way, this 4 and this 2, those are constants. They have nothing to do with what's up here, okay? This 4 and this 2 are going to appear in every single formula. Okay, and then we're going to divide that by 2 times 6. Okay, so now you have to slowly whittle away at this problem. So you want to do PEMDAS. You want to make sure you're doing your exponent first, then simplifying what's inside of the square root, then taking the square root, then doing a plus or minus negative 5, and then the denominator. Okay, so sorry, this is kind of cut off here. Let me fix that. Obviously 2 times 6 is 12. 5 squared is 25. If you take 4 times 6 times negative 4, this actually becomes a positive 96. Okay, so see how we're slowly whittling away at each of the problems, each of the numbers. So we're keeping going here. So now here's where it gets a little tricky. Okay, so when you take that 25 plus 96, that gives you 121. So we have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 121 over 12. We can take the square root of 121. That works out nice and pretty. It becomes 11, right? So we have negative 5 plus or minus 11 divided by 12. Okay, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. You got to separate these out into two cases. So you have negative 5 plus 11 divided by 12, and then negative 5 minus 11 divided by 12. Okay, see how we set that up as two equations? Okay, then you have negative 5 plus 11, which is actually 6 over 12, which reduces to 1/2. They skipped a step, sorry about that. And then negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16 divided by 12, and then reduced it down to negative 4/3. Don't skip this step. Come on, Hope McDougall. You know better. So don't skip that step right there, okay, guys? All right, next one. X squared equals x plus 20. Okay, this one, we do not have our equation set equal to 0. Okay, so we want to manipulate the equation so that we have everything on one side and it's set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract x on both sides, and I'm going to subtract a 20 on both sides, and this is how I get x. So when you do it, you're probably going to see x squared minus x plus 20. I'm sorry, plus a negative 20 or minus 20. So when you are looking at these, remember there's an imaginary 1 in front of these x's. Okay, so they kind of spell it out for you here. A is 1, B is negative 1, and C is negative 20. Always write down the quadratic formula every single time. Okay, so we're going to plug and chug. So now here's where you have to be careful. My B is a negative 1, but there's a negative in front of the B. So this is actually negative 1, okay, plus or minus negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 20. All of that is over 2 times 1. See how crazy the signs can get? So you have to be like super duper careful with the signs. I'm giving you all odd numbers so you can check your work, okay? All right, so when we reduce all this, we get 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 plus 81 over 2. And 80 plus 1 is 81. That works out nice, doesn't it? Because it's a square root, a perfect square. So we have 1 plus or minus the square root of 81 over 2, which simplifies into 1 plus or minus 9 over 2, because the square root of 81 is 9. See how everything's color-coded? Okay, we're going to set this up as two equations. X equals 1 plus 9 over 2, or x equals 1 minus 9 over 2. So we've got, this would be 10 over 2, which equals 5, and then negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4. Again, don't skip that step. I don't know why Hope McDougall does that kind of stuff. Okay. This is all set up as well, set equal to 0. So you're going to do the same thing. So we've got bigger numbers now. So you're going to plug and chug. I just want to see how if this turns out to... Yeah, that one turns out pretty. I want to skip to one where it doesn't quite turn out as pretty. So bear with me. Okay, this is one where it's not quite as pretty. All right, we've got, and they forgot the plus or minus here. We've got 1 for our A, 3 for our B, and negative 7 for our C. They forgot the plus or minus here. But what this gives us is negative 3 plus or minus 9 plus 28 over 2. When we add 9 and 28, we get 37. Now, is that a perfect square? No. So what I would do, what you can do is just leave it. You don't even need to do this last step here. You literally can leave it like this. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 37 over 2. If you want to approximate it, you can absolutely put this into a calculator. And actually for your homework, that might be a little bit better because you're going to put it in Google Forms. But what you would do is take the square root of 37, you would add a negative 3, and then divide by 2. That's going to give you your 1.54. Okay, then you can also, for the second one, take the square root of 37, and you're going to take negative 3 minus that number divided by 2, and it gives you negative 4.54. Okay, so you can use a calculator. Normally when you're in the classroom, I would just have you leave it like this, but that's a little hard to type into Google Forms. You can try, if it turns out that way. All right, let me see. This one turns out it's the same idea. Okay, now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is called the discriminant. Okay, the discriminant is going to tell you a lot of things about a quadratic. The discriminant is just the thing inside that square root. So b squared minus 4ac is our discriminant. Okay? And this is in your book, but when you have a discriminant that's positive, you're going to have two real solutions. Okay? When you have a discriminant that's 0, you're going to have one solution. And when you have a discriminant that's negative, you can't have any solutions because can you ever take the square root of a negative? Not yet. When you learn imaginary numbers in a couple of years, you can. But right now, we can't. So we call it no real solutions. Okay? So let's do an example of that real quick. If we look at letter A here, excuse me, you have A is 3, B is negative 2, and C is 2. We're just concerned about the discriminant, which is the numbers inside the square root. So b squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to take negative 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. When I simplify that, I get negative 20. So without doing the whole quadratic formula, I can say there are no real solutions. You don't even need to do anything else with the quadratic formula. Because there's no real solutions, you don't have to plug in. You're good to go. The next one, again, identify. A is 2, B is 11, C is 12. Plug and chug, and you get 25. It's positive, right? So that means we're going to have two solutions. Now you do have to do the rest of the quadratic formula because you know you're coming up with solutions, but now you know if you don't come up with 2, you did something wrong. Okay, and then finally this one, if you have A equals 1, B equals 8, and C equals 16, when we plug those in, we actually get 0. When we work all that out, we get 64 minus 64, which is 0, which means there's one real solution. Again, you would still have to do the quadratic, but now it's telling you, hey, we should only get one real solution. If you get 2, you did something wrong. Okay? All right, so that's it in a nutshell. I want to advance to your homework slide. Trying to keep it as short as possible. Look, if you get a word problem, don't freak out. They give you the formula, you just plug and chug, okay? That's all you gotta do. So I don't want anyone saying, I don't know how to do it, okay? Because I know you can. So here's your homework, page 587. It's numbers 3 through 23 odd. Again, I'll have a Google form for you ready. And you should be all set. If you have any questions, please let me know. Be happy to help you, and I will talk to you guys soon.